Hello students, the year 1991, the time period of unprecedented economic crisis for the Indian economy. The economy was on the brink of collapse. India needed a huge set of reforms, structural as well as long-term reforms to repair her damage. It was in this time period that there was an introduction of what is called as the new economic policy of 1991. Today we are going to study what is the need and why is there a need for this new economic policy. Why did the Indian economy in 1991 feel the need for introducing a new economic policy? The Indian economy, when it embarked on the process of economic growth and development, decided to adopt the 5-year planning methods in order to bring about economic development. Over a period of time, the Indian economy indulged into the setting up of large public sector enterprises and these large-scale industrialization through public sector. Slowly and steadily, the public sector enterprises did not provide the kind of returns that were expected by the economy. It also indulged in giving a lot of losses. The financial sector had to divert the resources to the public sector enterprises in order to help the employment objective of the labor. And finally, there was huge cost of production, high prices, less efficiency, shortage of resources, and of course there was a lot of red tapeism and corruption, which ultimately resulted in the tremendous loss-making public sector units. And by the time it was 1991, major crisis was experienced by the Indian economy in the form of fiscal crisis, the BOP crisis, and of course the inflation crisis. Let us understand these crises faced by the economy one by one. To begin with, by the end of 1980s, the Indian economy had started experiencing a deteriorating fiscal situation because of widening of the gap between the government expenditure and government revenue. The government had spent a lot of its expenditure on non-developmental expenditure such as interest payments. The burden of the interest payments was as high as 29% of the revenue expenditure of the government, along with a lot of internal debt to the central government, which was to the tune of 48.6% of the GDP, and also the burden of the subsidies. Not to forget to mention that the fiscal deficit of the Indian economy was as high as 7.7% of its GDP in 1991. High fiscal deficits in the 1980s was also one of the root causes for the crisis of 1991. And reducing the fiscal deficit was therefore an important macroeconomic objective of the NEP. The second important crisis which the Indian economy experienced was the balance of payment crisis, also known as the crisis of confidence. It was the outcome of the Gulf War in 1990. The Gulf War resulted in extreme increase in the oil prices, as a result of which the Indian economy experienced worsening of her current account deficit, and the current account deficit rose to almost 3.2% of her GDP. In monetary terms, it rose to 9.7 billion US dollars. The Indian economy was losing its importance in the world economy, and many of the countries started looking at the Indian economy as an economy which could not handle its crisis in the international arena. As a result of which, the Indian economy also experienced a crisis of confidence whether it had the ability to manage and repay the entire amount for its balance of payment to be steady. The foreign exchange reserves in the Indian economy were just about close to 1 billion US dollars. Along with this, the NRI deposits also took flight of capital from the country, and at the same time, a default of payments was almost a possibility by June 1991. High inflationary pressure was crisis number 3 for the Indian economy. The wholesale prices in India rose at an annual rate of 8.2% for a one decade time period starting from 1981 to 1993-94. By the time it was 1991, the Indian economy experienced a double digit inflation and it stood at 10.2%. It was very important for the Indian economy to control this crisis. The average annual rate of inflation was very high, almost hovering between 10 to 14% till the year 1994-95. It was at the backdrop of these major crises that the Indian economy decided to go in for the new economic policy 1991. The new economic policy 1991 ushered huge structural changes for the Indian economy. It was a very bold step taken by the government to reshape the nature of the economy to achieve some of its significant objectives. And it was none other than Dr. Manmohan Singh who chaired himself as the finance minister for the Indian economy and gave us this very successful new economic policy 1991. Well, students, I hope you understood the crisis faced by the Indian economy in the year 1991 and why India needed a new economic policy and who introduced the new economic policy in 1991. This is what you are going to learn in the next part of the series. The new economic policy was introduced by none other than Dr. Manmohan Singh.